right, we are back with another week, another day with the DePIN Masterminds. I intended this to be a bigger group than just the two of us. We just have so much to talk about. We keep coming back to this. I do next week, though, want to start bringing in more people. I want to start adding to the conversation. I just feel like everything we've done over the last few weeks have really been maybe some of the level setting of our expectations. And so I definitely want to start incorporating more of the council, which we still got to figure out the name of, but we've got a little vote going on in our Telegram group of what that council should be called. But again, welcome back. I'm Ken Anderson with Tashi Protocol. I'm the CTO over there, and I've got Brandon Baker here with me, who's founder of Conduit. Brandon, go ahead and say hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. Dude,
Good.
You dropped some heavy stuff on me before we went live. And so now, now we got to have a separate conversation afterwards. I don't know if this is the venue for that discussion, but tell me, what's up with the cowboy hat? You got to tell me. Is this your normal head attire? Is this what you normally wear?
Sometimes. This is back to my roots. So up in Washington State, my family's sixth generation up there ranching and settled the land in 1859. And so, yeah, I come from this. And there's times when I just, decide that it needs to go on. And today was one of those days, given everything that's going on. I said, you know what? It's a cowboy hat day. That's what it is.
Well, so just real quick, for anybody who doesn't know, today is, and I don't know how you couldn't know, but today is elections in the U.S. So everybody in the U.S., all you Americans who are qualified to vote, go vote.
Please.
That's first and foremost. I don't know how many people are going to hear this that are in the U.S. that are going to hear it by the end of the day, but first and foremost, go vote. I think that's our civic duty as citizens. If we don't vote, we can't complain about much. I mean, voting really is our fundamental right as an American citizen and in any democratic country. Although in the U.S., we like to think of ourselves more as a constitutional republic more than a democracy. But that all being said, it is our responsibility to go out and vote. So as soon as our stream is over, wait until the stream's over. But as soon as we're done, and if you haven't voted, take your lunch, go out and vote. So, or get out of work early and go and vote, wherever you are in the U.S. So awesome. Anything you want to say? I don't want to get too much into the elections because I try to keep politics out of these discussions. I got plenty to say, but anything you want to talk about? Because I know that, I'll bring up one thing in particular. As we're talking to VCs, I noticed there's a lot of money being held back until after the results of the election. And I think that just is people kind of anticipating what the effects on crypto and blockchain might be, depending on who gets elected. And I'm not going to take a position either way or the other. I have a position, a very strong position. But any thoughts from your end? Any observations from your end, Brandon? What are some of the observations you've seen?
I would agree to the same thing. I don't mean just an investment in crypto, but global money, capital markets, everything is there. There is a lot riding on this election from the global stage as well. I love your PSA. I want to back that up and say, yes, please go vote. It is so important. And it does matter. I think a lot of people don't think that their vote matters. It absolutely does. And it's not just a vote for you, it's a vote for generations. And that's how we need to think about it here in the United States specifically. There's a lot of areas in which they actually don't even get to participate in a vote at all. And something that it is a true, beautiful liberty. And the reason why many people come here, among other things, but many people come to the United States and from the beginning was this notion of freedom, of sovereignty and liberty and equality for all. And so anyways, it's ironic, or maybe perhaps not, but many of those core tenets go over into the Web3 space too. They may not be said exactly the same way, but they actually, the undertones and underpinnings of them are in existence. This notion of freedom, of sovereignty, And so bringing it back to the money side, yeah, I think everyone is in a freeze right now. We're seeing the Ken, you and I talk about GDP in turns. Okay. And so I will say this, that there is has been a exponential slowdown of turns globally in the quarter over quarter up to here. So in this last third quarter, in percentages that have never been seen. I'll leave it at that. They're very, very big, to the tune of tens of trillions of dollars that has just stopped. So if that doesn't tell you how much the world's looking at this, and of course, there's other things going on. The election is not the only thing. There are multiple things happening in the world today. But as we like to say, the money doesn't lie. And if you look at the trends of what's happening, there has been a massive slowdown of turns and money movement across the globe. So something is going to happen. We don't know what that exactly something is. So that's what I'll say. I also do have a very strong stance. It's my personal belief system, and knowing that here's the reality. I will say this. There's never going to be a perfect person to put in a leadership position. We are all fundamentally flawed human beings. The question is where the flaws lie. And so what you really just want to do is make sure that you're voting for the individual that closely aligns with, your core values. Vote for policies, not people. That is really important. There's many people that perhaps I come across and don't love in this world, but I respect them for certain things that they have done or their ability to execute certain things. And so I think here in the United States, sometimes we have too much that goes into a popularity contest. And really, I'm personally, what I will say is I vote on policies, who I believe they're going to put in the best policies for the things that my family's doing, operating, obviously specifically in Web3. That's very important to us, right? So I'm looking very closely at policies and administrations that I believe will, I'm very good with regulation. Many people would say, I don't want it all. I'm actually okay with it. I just want the right regulation that does not stifle innovation. That is the key. In fact, good regulation would mean the elevation and maturity of our entire space. That's okay. It can't suffocate innovation. We need the ability to be an innovation leader, which we have in many ways in the United States, and we need that happening here. So I'm going to get off my soapbox for a second.
Yeah, well, and I want to second it. I mean, there's a few things that have come up over the last few months, really, and obviously you notice it a lot in X. For better or for worse, there's a lot of controversy that goes on. And I would say that most people I talk to are pretty intelligent people, and they have a pretty well articulated reason why they're taking the position they're taking. So instead of like you see a lot of X posts of people lambasting somebody who's voting for somebody they don't agree with and saying you're an idiot and how could you vote for a person and insert list of atrocities, right?
Yep.
And I've seen it on both sides, but maybe the answer really is like, well, why would you vote for that person? Maybe that's the question we should be asking. Not why are you voting for that person, but why would you vote for that person? Like, explain to me, what are the reasons? And I think in some cases, I know I had this conversation with my wife a few months ago where I was just thinking, if all of the accusations against either candidate was true, suppose we just had the worst candidate in the world on a personal level, just immoral, corrupt, all that stuff, but it saved lives and improved the economy, would I still vote for that person, even though on a personal level, I don't align with that person at all? And the question is, do I do what's best, what I think is best for my country and for the world and for my business and for my family, despite some of the conflicts in value systems with the people I'd vote for? And the answer to that is yes. Like, I'm not going to withhold my vote. I'm going to vote if it's two evils for the lesser of two evils. But even if I mean, I don't want to even go into like some of the atrocities that we kind of explored, like, well, what if they did this? Well, what if they did that? But I do know something that stuck out to me big time when I was I used to do military intelligence way back in the days. I was in human intelligence. And I remember being in Kosovo, and I remember providing a report to my G2, who was the general in charge of intelligence for the base, and giving him a report about a location of weapons caches and stuff like that. And then there were a bunch of cavalry, who went in and like raided this village and like cleared door to door, and then found one of the houses had a cache in it, which was as a direct result of our intelligence. When I talked to the Cav guys, they had no idea why they were going into that town and doing door to doors. To them, it was just an operation, right? They did these things normally, and um, and this was just their boss handed them a location, said, go do door to door in this town. And then they found a cache and thought, wow, look at this. We found this cache. The reality is that they received orders as a direct result of our report to the general, the G2, and and that flowed out. And that made me think, like, there's a lot going on that we don't see. And whoever the president of the United States is going to be sees a whole lot that we don't see, and has to make really difficult decisions based off of that information. Now, we want to vote for the person who most closely represents our value systems so that we can trust that they'll make the best decisions. But even with people you don't agree with as president, like as soon as they become president, as soon as the country votes and that person becomes president, I'm kind of hands off, because I don't have the information they have to make the decisions they make. There's so much going on that we don't even know about. And I'm just thinking back to my time in Kosovo, those Cav guys who were doing the door to door and finding the cache had no idea what our operations looked like. So they didn't even know why they were there doing the work. It was just a normal day for them, right? But for us, it was like, oh, we can see all the pieces connecting together. And I'm sure there were other pieces outside of our scope that were connecting that helped the G2 make certain decisions as well. I know the G2 didn't very infrequently made decisions based off of our information alone. We also worked with the CIA, and we worked with NSA and all kinds of other organizations. So we had lots of information coming from different places. And some of those I saw and some of them I didn't see. But I suspect that the G2 saw things that I didn't see and was making decisions on his base of things that that nobody else saw. So anyway, my point being is, like, the systems are pretty robust that we've developed in the US when it comes to constitutional checks and balances, and when it comes to our voting and electoral college system. Like, I just say, trust the system. There are some things that concern me a little bit more in this election than have previous elections. And I don't know how much of that is just a lot of the hype that I've been inundated with, or how much of that is like real. My hope is that the Constitution is strong enough to protect us against some of the craziness that could happen on the other side of this election. So, but that's my hope. And, but I also have to give a little bit of grace to whoever's in charge, because having been in some of those positions where I had more information than the people who were acting on the information, I have to trust that there are some people who are making decisions based off of way more information than I have. And hopefully it's not with the intent of selling wartime weapons. Hopefully there are other motivations there. So anyway, I just want to leave it at that. Is almost everybody I interact with in this space is intelligent. Everybody has a reason for making certain decisions, and we should trust each other's judgment, and maybe even question each other's judgment. And that's kind of what we do in this group, right? Yep. Is where we each are in our position. And if we're intellectually honest, and sometimes the best thing we can do is question each other. If we're intellectually honest, we can push each other and come to a conclusion about our projects and maybe our go-to-market strategies and all of these things that we wouldn't have come to before. And I think that's the same when it comes to politics, right? When we talk to each other and we ask each other, why are you making that decision, or why are you supporting that candidate? Sometimes you learn things that may or may not sway your position, but at least you understand that that's a reasonable position for them to take. And if it's not a reasonable position, you can challenge it, and they can choose to defend it, or they can get offended. Hopefully they defend it. And if they defend it, you can go, okay, that's fine. And there's some very hot political topics that maybe we'll talk about in person someday that, that I have interesting positions on. And there are even some where like I can understand both sides. the argument. I just happen to have a very strong position on one side of that, but I can understand both sides of the argument. So anyway, politics aside, because today's just one of those days, right? Today's everybody's on bated breath until 8 p.m. Pacific, because that's when Pacific numbers start rolling in and Eastern numbers have already been rolling in for 3 hours. So we're starting to see stuff happening. So 8 p.m. Pacific today, we should have an interesting picture, but we're probably not even going to know for a few days.
Probably not. Yep.
What's actually happening. Now, in other news, unless you had something else you wanted to mention there.
Oh, that's great. I think let's move on.
Awesome. In other news, we made an announcement this morning.
We did.
Do you know about that announcement?
I heard something.
I love that it's got the retinol advertisement there on the side. But this is the announcement right here. Let's close at least this one right here. We don't need to have all of them up. But we've announced a partnership between Tashi and Conduit. And I think this is something that has organically happened. Obviously, we've been talking for weeks in the DePIN space, and I suspect we'll have a few more of these announcements coming out over the next few weeks with other participants in the ecosystem. But in particular, I can talk a little bit about the Tashi perspective of this partnership, but did you want to talk a little bit about the Conduit perspective?
Yeah. I think this was a really easy one. The more, Ken, the more that we got to talking on a multifaceted spectrum, which is, it wasn't just the technological partnership for us. There was more to it, which is why we're getting into these conversations, right? Because there's more to building in this space than just on the technical side. I think the technical aspects get ran to very quickly and talked about and overemphasized. And I'm not saying that they're not important, but when you're building anything, it depends on what models you're building inside of. And so for us, like when we're looking at this really has an opportunity to impact, all the way out into commerce and economies. And so if you're building the technology with those models in mind, you end up building something the exact same, like take something very, very simple, like, ZKs. You may implement ZKs and architect them differently if you have a different mental model in which you're thinking the application would be, right?
That's right.
And so I think that's what's really interesting as you and I have gotten into more conversations. It was understanding that I think first and foremost, we had alignment on bigger mental models, that there was more here than just the raw implementation of the tech. In fact, if I remember correctly, some of the nitty gritties of the technology didn't even come out till later conversations, because we were sorting through some of these bigger concepts, which I believe are fundamental in terms of an architecture. If you can't uncover those, walk through them, and figure out whether, if you have two parties, that there's alignment and or things you need to talk about disagreements, right, and pushback, then how do you know what you're actually going to build? Because the technology is just a tool. It's a tool to get us in a means to an outcome, right? So what is the outcome in which we're trying to achieve? And does it have all the facets of what we need to think about in that outcome? And so I look at technology, I'm like, guys, for technology, it's only ever been an accelerator. It's accelerating something.
Well, and I think, the technology is the core of what we're building. So there has to be like a viability to what we're building. There has to be a feasibility and a viability. And I think it doesn't take a lot to test feasibility. Viability, I think, is more along the lines of what you're talking about, which is what is the cultural and economic alignment around what we're doing, and how do we add value in a way where the outcome is beneficial to every stakeholder in this relationship, right? So the technical part, we did a little bit of feasibility in the beginning. We've been working on this for a few months now, since DePIN Day, right? And and I think part of it was, I think the interesting thing to me is that we're starting in the gaming space, but very quickly, even in our relationship, it was like, hey, in addition to gaming, we have this thing called FoxMQ that's a message queue. It's a decentralized message queue. And then your team is like, hey, wait a second, we need a decentralized message queue. And they were like, well, let's go ahead and take a look at it and see what we can do. And then it was like, well, what else can we do with Tashi? It's like, well, we're also doing decentralized configuration management and decentralized databases. And you're like, wait, we have customers who need decentralized databases and we need decentralized configuration management. And we're sitting thinking like, well, wait a second. A lot of what we're building under the hood of the gaming use case that we're focusing on could benefit Conduit's business model as well, both internally, but also with your customers, and bring that additional value. So now you have something that's more valuable to take to your customers. And I think it's that kind of alignment. First of all, it's the technical feasibility that allows us to explore those types of use cases. But then it's the economic alignment as well of like, okay, well, this is how much they're spending on the devices. This is what the licensing would cost on Tashi. And overall, this is what they're saving. And I think one of the interesting things that you brought up in our last conversation, and even in a few conversations this week that you and I have had privately, is like a lot of the math that we're doing right now is how much money can I save by using this new technology as an incumbent in this vertical, in this industry? And you're adding the math to it of like, okay, well, how much can I also produce in addition to what I'm saving? So where I always bring up the business drivers of make more money, spend less money, and stay out of jail. Staying out of jail is what we're trying to do. One of the parts of it. I'm always focused on spending less money, right? Because I'm going to where the customers are. The customers are already spending money somewhere, which is a component I want to focus on a little bit today. And I want to save them some money because that's a much easier sell. But if you're doing that and you're going, oh, by the way, you're also making some money, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the context of a discussion I've been having this week with one of my friends. But there was this natural alignment between what we were doing, both on the technical and the economic. So I know you've got a bunch of projects you're working on, and I'm sure there are going to be a bunch of announcements coming out soon. But I think what we're going to see is a lot of where Conduit is handling the hardware level of a lot of this. And even there's some software stuff going on with Conduit as well. I mean, there's some secret sauce in there, especially in the accounting side of stuff, right? That we could even leverage as a Tashi. And Tashi sits as maybe a higher level application that focuses on synchronizing data sets. And so there's kind of this natural organic fit. They're complementary, if you will.
Yep.
And that's what I looked at. I looked at this almost like in the internet stack, right? The OSI stack, right? Where you've got the physical layer, and then you've got well, you've even got even below the physical layer, but you got the physical layer, you've got the IP layer, you got the TCP layer, TCP, UDP layer. Then you start getting your application layers on top of that. And I'm thinking a lot of the things that Conduit handles, both down at the physical and the link layer and the IP layer, that helps us, even at the TCP layer, that helps, or the transport layer, I should call it, the transport layer where TCP and UDP live. But that transport layer, that Conduit helps take off of our plate. Because one of our challenges from a technical perspective is, cool, we've got all these Tashi machines or these parties in a consensus session, and they're talking to each other. But how do we ensure that on a network layer, they can even see each other, first of all? And then additionally, how do we protect their devices from vulnerability within that session? Like, how do we preserve privacy and preserve security while also opening up communication on a public internet that is listened to by everyone, right? We can do some encryption. Great. Encryption helps to a degree. But now we're also opening up ports, and we're managing DMZs, and we're messing with our firewalls and NATs, right? To make Tashi available to people on the internet. But how do we do that all in a secure way, in a predictable, controlled way? And I think that's where Conduit plays a key role in a lot of what Tashi's doing. And that's why I'm excited to like sell Conduit to even our Tashi users and say, hey, listen, you want to simplify this entire network management stuff? Just buy a Conduit core unit, buy a network unit, right? And then run Tashi on that. Yep. And now you can have Tashi nodes running out there on Conduit hardware, right? So to me, that's the exciting part, even in the gaming side of it. But now we step outside the gaming side and we're like, well, fundamentally, Tashi is a consensus engine that is used to synchronize data very, very quickly. That's fundamentally what we are, which means message queues, databases, configuration managers, like all of those things become different avenues of implementation that could benefit your partners, your clients, in a way that didn't exist before. So while Conduit benefits Tashi's gaming use case, the core of Tashi also benefits Conduit's go-to-market. And I think that's where we were just like, well, we might as well formally become partners and just figure this out.
Well, 100%. And then I think to take it a step further was this notion of, we keep going back to it, but mutualized value or mutualized economics.
Yep.
Right. And so, okay, you've got two projects that have, worked on arguably different layers of the stack that seem to look to fit very well and complement one another. That's great. That's a technological fit. How do you then take it to the next step and say, but what's the mutualized benefit of both of these individuals? And not just like from a product fit into both stacks. There's more value that resides in efficiency and flow of capital that we've talked about, right? And so if you can align those, we've talked so much about alignment. If you can align that to where you are capturing value from the outside and keeping that in as much as you can and recirculating, there's a large compounding effect for both ecosystems, for you and Tashi and everyone that resides in there, as well as Conduit. If we take that a step further and we go talk about like the rewards network, which we have, right? Okay, well then what also now becomes interesting is that if Conduit's able to achieve any sense of mass scale, which we believe that we can, now what Tashi has in what they're earning on the Tashi token, as an example, as well as the ability to participate in the rewards network, which is much larger, right? Outside of that network, they're able to transfer that value at a minimal reduction, the value that they create internally. Transference is not we don't have a reduction in transference, and now they have a viability of expenditure.
All right. So let me put that in like human words here for everybody that's listening. So imagine this. You've got a Tashi node running on a Conduit device, and we've got this integrated economy. So you're earning the eTashi token, you're earning the Conduit, staking that and getting a mining and getting your rewards as well as Conduit. So we're getting both of these in here. The cool thing is by earning eTashi and staking eTashi, potentially you're earning these rewards as well. So there's kind of two opportunities here. One of them is by being a participant in the Tashi ecosystem, you're now able to participate in the rewards ecosystem of Conduit. Additionally, Tashi becomes one of the reward merchants, if you will, in the Conduit network. So now anything you're earning in the Conduit network that generates rewards can now be spent on Tashi resources and services. So we're creating kind of this holistic where we earn together and we spend together, but all the value stays in our community, right? It stays in this ecosystem that grows this GDP organically. And I think this was the first, like when we did DePIN Day and we're sitting there with Flux and IoTex and GeoDnet, NFT Minter, NFT Mint.
Yeah. Yep.
It's NFT Mint, but I think he goes by NFT Minter on X. So, and then Conduit and then us, right? When we're sitting there talking about it and I'm sitting there looking over at Flux and being like, man, there's a bunch of services I would love to consume from Flux. Storage, compute, GPUs. And man, I'd love to go buy one of those GeoDnet devices using these rewards that I'm earning through Conduit or through Tashi. And I'm looking at IoTex. I'm like, IoTex has a whole stack of technology that could be useful that, if integrated, brings a lot of DePINs into the equation. So it's this idea of, instead of us all being individual silos, the economic alignment is actually more interesting in some cases than the technical alignment. Well, we have like a strong technical alignment. The economic potential becomes significantly more expensive. Now, let me put that in a little bit more like concrete use case, because I've been talking to a friend of mine, and I'm not going to call out their company just yet because I don't know that they want me to mention the company name, but they do vertical farming, and they've built these towers that have racks in them that use LED lighting, and they've got but it's designed for feeding livestock and not humans. So there's some really cool implications that they could do. Really good implications as a result of their technology. But the biggest and most important part is what they call the brain. Like the rest of it, it can be commoditized, right? You can go out and build, these towers and the racks and the lighting systems in any country, anywhere in the world. And that was actually one of the questions of like, as a business, are we selling racks or are we selling brains, right? And it came down to they're selling brains because that's the harder one. That's the easier one to defend and it's the harder one to replicate. And what they've done is they've gotten to the point where they build these recipes, if you will. And the recipes include things like nutrient content of the water, lighting schedule, lighting intensities and frequencies, the crop type, the seed. So every seed has an ID. And so depending on which seed you put in there, you could load a different recipe into the brain, and then it would grow that seed at its optimal capacity and capability. And what they're showing is that it's using 2% of the water and 1% of the land it would normally take to grow. And this one tower grows something like 24,000 pounds of feed a day in one tower, right? So massive optimization. So you can imagine, if you were a cattle rancher, cough, cough, hint, hint, like how much this could potentially optimize your yield as a cattle rancher, right? Because you're removing a lot of the guesswork of feed, because feed is fickle, right? And I think one of the magic things that cattle ranchers do is figure out how to source appropriate feed, how to mix it appropriately, how to keep the cattle healthy with that. It's always like the secret sauce of doing it. In this case, you're basically saying, I know which seed I'm using. I know all of the conditions of growing this feed, and I can try out different recipes and I can tweak the recipes, and the feed goes straight from harvest to the cattle's mouth, right? Instead of getting dried or transported and everything starts to degrade and ferment. So there's this huge optimization here. But because the brain is what's most valuable in their product, I'm also talking to them right now about, okay, how do we share the knowledge or the learning between these cattle ranchers without compromising their secret sauce? Like, how can I use the data that they're generating in part of an AI calculation, or maybe just an algorithmic calculation, to figure out what tweaks or recommendations should I give each cattle rancher based off their current recipe that they're feeding their cattle? So you might want to say something like, okay, I'm inputting my current weather patterns and, moisture and barometric pressure of where my cattle are. And maybe there's something that somebody else has experienced that said, hey, you need to feed them food that has this much more of this nutrient to help resist against the cold or the wet or whatever the scenario is, reduce infection and all of that stuff. That could all be affected just by the feed composition. So you probably know better than me, to be honest, the impacts of that type of technology, right? So, but I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, the first question I have is, how do we preserve privacy to keep the cattle ranchers happy that they've got their secret sauce? Additionally, how do we share the results of the data in a way that's meaningful to improve the recipes? Like, how do we share the learning without sharing the underlying data? And then third, how do we lay an incentive layer on top of that to incentivize these cattle ranchers to share data, to actually participate in recipe improvement? And so there's a few things that came to me. I'm like, dude, what if we just stuck a conduit device on-prem, created these like private VLANs between a network of cattle ranchers, and the accounting's done on the conduit level of like who's sharing what and how they're getting compensated. And then we have Tashi sitting there synchronizing the data sets, whatever those data sets may be. It could be raw data. It could be the results of calculations done locally in AI on the conduit devices. And then we take those results and synchronize that across everybody using Tashi. What about configuration management? What about recipe distribution? Like when we have new improvements, patches to recipes, we could synchronize those patches using Tashi over the top. Wow, my screen is going crazy. This is what happens when you use your iPhone as your webcam.
It really liked that. I got excited.
iPhone loves it. Yeah. I'm getting excited. I can tell my iPhone's getting excited now. Wow. So, but these are all the things that I'm thinking about, like real concrete use cases that affect our day-to-day operations, supply chain and ranching. I mean, this is something that potentially could decrease the total cost of creating beef and dairy and improve the quality of the beef and the dairy as well. And this is something like we're legitimately talking to people about this, right?
Yep.
My buddy who's doing this wants to see how we can kind of incorporate our technologies. And it's not like we're going in and saying, can we shove our tech in there? We're going in, we're going, okay, we see you have a problem.
Yep.
Or we see you have a desired outcome. Maybe that's a better way to think about it. We see that you've got some desired outcome. Now we think we could improve that outcome. And here's how. And we'll do some feasibility tests in there. We'll do some collaboration. We'll do some POCs. But these are the types of real world use cases where we're going into an industry that has a budget, a multi-billion-dollar budget, multi-tens of billions of dollars of budget. And we're going, how can we either A, put more money into the cattle rancher's pocket, while B, decreasing the cost and increasing the quality of meat and dairy? Like, we want to talk about cost savings and improving human health and improving. I mean, farming's a massive issue as it is. But how do we do this in a way that is reasonable and not cumbersome on the consumer? Because I think a lot of times we say like, oh, I want, grass-fed, or I want free range, or whatever the words are, and you're paying twice the price for something that gives you like a 1% increase in value. Versus, no, we're actually going to give you massive improvement in value. And guess what? It's actually cheaper because it's more efficient. Now, here's the cool part that, I was having this discussion with my friend's BD guy, his biz dev guy, and I was bringing it up about how conduit could be useful in this use case. And he was coming back and saying to me, well, how do we sell this to the farmers? Like, we need to have something that gets them excited about it. Like reducing costs, there's still a risk for them, right? They're still adopting a new technology and there's still a risk. But they're like, reducing costs, sometimes that risk doesn't outweigh the savings in their mind, right? So they want to like, how can we strengthen this story that gets them excited about it? And that's where I'm sitting here thinking like reduction in cost and improvement in quality. Like, what better motivator is there? But then you came and you're like, well, what if we took their cost center and just turned it into a profit center? What if we started to subsidize some of the costs of the new tower because it's, the tower's all electrical. So while their land cost goes down and their watering cost goes down significantly, their electrical cost goes up by implementing these towers. What if we could offset some of that cost with creating a profit center with these devices? So not only are they creating a profit center from their recipes, but also from everything else that the conduit device and the Tashi device licenses can do on top of that. And we start creating this ecosystem of DePIN projects that can all kind of live on this device, on this conduit device. And maybe we add additional sensors in there, right? Maybe we partner with GeoNet. Maybe we partner with Helium. Maybe all these projects. And we say, hey, listen, we're going to sell you a package. This is your DePIN package. And you're going to just attach this to the building that your tower is in. Because everybody's going to have like a little warehouse with one of these towers in, or multiple warehouses with multiple towers. I want you to throw all these sensors on top, connect them to your conduit device, hit start, and boom, now you're generating money from all of these DePIN projects. And you're getting all the benefits we were talking about before. So now we're also offsetting your costs of electricity as you're running these new devices. So anyway, that's kind of, and then, we're not even talking about the rewards economy.
I was going to say,
like, we haven't even started talking about like, oh, how about track and trace with beef all the way to the consumer? What about being able to use rewards to buy beef and dairy? Like, there's a whole nother world of economics that comes out of
buy your supplies, to buy your equipment, to capitalize the equipment, to turn around, and when you have a depreciation and turnover of equipment, how do you do the replacement with all the rewards that you've created for the last 4 years after you've depreciated all that equipment, and you buy your whole new set with rewards, no cash out of pocket, right? Like that's where you start seeing something where you're driving exponential increases, decrease in costs and increase in efficiency, scalability, and then value back to the farmers. I think you brought up a really interesting point, is that many of these farmers, and I can speak to like specifically us and our family, right? We are very, what we would be considered a small operation, and that's by design. And we focus very highly on quality, but then we turn around and like our steaks have gone back to the James Beard House in New York and won 3 years in a row, right? So it's like really high quality, right? And I'm sitting there going, you're talking about the secret sauce. I'm like, yeah, that's us.
Yep.
Like the amount of testing, the amount of the amount of land management that we do, because beef, and again, I'm just to focus on this. Are you familiar with like terroir and wine? Like the flavor, the palate, beef has that, and it's based off of what they're consuming. It makes sense, right? Like that
makes perfect sense. Yeah.
That changes based off of their feed, their nutrients, everything that the microbiome in the actual soil, all of it. And so we're constantly testing and trying to replenish and create that so that we have a high quality output. So if we had a formula that was our differentiator in the market, one of the things you're going to run up against is like, well, I don't want to release that.
Yeah.
That's a differentiator for us.
Yep.
Right now, it might be a different concept if someone told us two different things. Number one is if you were going to release that as your proprietary recipe, what if there was a built-in royalty to this entire system?
Right. Yes.
Okay. Now you're talking about a trade secret that we have spent countless time, right? Generations perfecting. That if we're going to let out, I'm okay with it if there's some sort of capturing value for that intellectual property, right?
Yep.
Okay, how do you do that systematically? Well, look at conduits, synchronized accounting, and tokenization on demand. You could start creating.
Well, and now you start creating a track and trace solution, which the entire supply chain industry is looking for anyway. People want to know where their beef is coming from. They want to know where their meat's coming from. That's way more important than the organic label that people put on things.
Well, and the organic label is very hard to actually verify.
Exactly.
So it's very easy to actually achieve and very hard to actually verify. So you're right. Now we have verifiability, right? Not just on the ability to obtain the data, but to track and verify the data is correct. And so I think there's something very unique there in the ability to have very traditional supply chains, and farming's a really good one to look at this, right? Where you could have this share of trade secrets and intellectual property because they're still able to capture value on it. Then the second measure is this: if the reward system and everything that is built around it in these economies and these ecosystems is done correctly, then what you design is a rising tide rises all ships.
Yep.
Okay, so even if I felt like I had released something and I didn't have an ability to completely capture it on one-to-one in a royalty-like setting, the advantage that I have is by participating in this, I have two things. I have a lowered cost because we have economies of scale that is now being spread throughout not my operation, but all of the operations. Okay, that's great. That's a cost side. The second thing is that we're mutualizing the revenue, right? Which means that even if my operation isn't growing or growing exponentially, or I happen to hand this to my buddy down the road and he boomed, okay, because of the mutualization, there is a portion of that comes back. Nowhere today in our current system does that happen. It's he won and I lost.
Right. And at scale, that's non-trivial. Like, if it's you and me sharing and saying, let's build an economy together and go out to market, we might get maybe a 20% or a 10% boost to our business.
Correct.
If we do this on the scale of 100 businesses in our industry, we might get finally like a 2x boost to our business, right? Because we've got this, this is economies of scale, right? And network effects. So it's like network effects meets economies of scale. But you do this at, 1 million or 10 million participants in an ecosystem. Now your company becomes not just 2x, but potentially 10, 100x its potential. And maybe the core value that you're receiving, that you're generating, has nothing to do with beef. It has everything to do with economies and turns.
That's it. So, right. And all of a sudden what you get, Ken, is that you in that scenario that you walk through,
you get an organism that looks and operates like people would think today as some of the largest corporations in the world. But guess what?
Mhm.
There's no topco.
Yeah.
There's no control point. It is all a makeup of individual people, businesses, families operating. But what they get to achieve is economies of scale that only the top corporations in the world can achieve.
Right.
So you get the advantage of that with
Yep.
none of the control and anything else that comes around with selling out to a corporation, right? And having very few people make decisions. You're still able to operate sovereignly, autonomously. You just get the economic benefit of being a part of it. And that's like, and this is what, we've talked about this. This is what some of the larger corporations do in the world, is that they go capture their entire supply chain. Why do they do that?
Yeah, exactly.
They do it for one reason, is what we're talking about.
Yep.
Right? And so how do you take the model that's been proven over the last 100 years of this very clearly as a very strategic model to roll up your supply chain, and how do you push that back to people and keep things decentralized?
Well, we got a question.
Oh,
we got a question here from DePIN Crypto. It said, will IoT devices integrate into conduit cores?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you need internet. You need something to plug into, right? Most of these devices, I think, will talk directly to your network, but the conduit networking model is exactly that entry point, right? That's my understanding. Is in your stack, you've got the security module, the network module.
Correct.
The network module is basically a router.
Yep.
And so you could take all of these IoT devices and plug them right into that router, and now you get all the benefits that you would get with conduit, which is the private networks, the encryption, the VLANs over the internet type of thing,
That's
VPN type relation, these mesh networks, if you will.
I was just going to say, we think of IoT as a extension, an arm, a finger of the mesh, right? All it's doing is speaking to it, relaying it back, bringing the information back in, and disseminating, doing something. So absolutely, IoT. Now, the question we get, and we always have to distinguish, is conduit getting into the IoT game? No, not right now. That's not a core competency ours. But here's how I might alter my answer when I say no, conduit is not doing that. What I would like to have happen is that we have IoT participants come into the conduit network to participate under their own company, own brand in this mutualization, right? So they're members of the network, but conduit core isn't getting into IoT. We're just like, hey, like, we've got this side. You have kind of the conversation we've had here, Ken. You have that side. Why don't we put this together and economically, not structurally, not control, economically in a value chain, and let's both, have benefits from that. That's what we want people to see. Is ultimately, if we looked, 5 years down the road here, is that people are seeing this as that's why the word network is in there, is they're seeing this as a network to participate in, to bring the value they've created into the network, not under this, not in control, that none of that stuff exists, right? Because again, conduit has no topco.
Right.
You need to participate to go like, well, if I bring this in here, do people need that? And can I turn whatever this singular value is into a multiple by operating in this exponentially larger value chain? Yeah. And the answer should be 100% of the time, yes.
Well, and so this is what when we met at DePIN Day, there was kind of like this meeting of them. This is where the whole masterminds thing comes from, right? The whole DePIN Masterminds comes from this group of people that see this potential, this network effect between each other, this economies of scale is working together. What are some of the friction points that we're going to run into? Because I suspect there are projects out there that are saying, what do we need a council for all this collaboration when we're already solving all those problems? For better or for worse, in a better way or in a worse way. But there are projects out there that are going to say, we're already solving this problem. What do we need to come into your council and participate in this economy? Because I think that, to me, that was the more exciting part about what the result of DePIN Day was. The technical integration part we can figure out. I can look at almost any project and go, okay, how do we plug that IoT device into a conduit core? How do we use Tashi to synchronize data between these sets? How do we use Flux to store things? Like I can think through all of those types of things and do it in a way where there's meaningful value, right? Where it's not just, we're just doing it because we want to have people here. But the more exciting thing to me was like, how the heck do we do settlement? I've got a token, you've got a token. How do my token buyers get a benefit out of this participation? And that was the more exciting discussion that we were starting to have while we were there. And so, so that's exactly what I'm thinking about. Like, that should be an easy sale, but there's going to be friction. There are going to be projects out there that are going to think, hey, we've already done a $50 million or $100 million raise. We don't really need you guys, right? We're going to go solve this problem our own way. We don't need to work with partners. And I don't know what projects they have going under the hood, but I think for me, the exciting part about this is not just the economic part, but the part where, like, I'm saying, hey, Brandon, I've got this project that could really use conduit units. And I think we can work Tashi into it as well. Or I've got this project that needs Tashi, but I think it could benefit from having conduit units, right? I call you like twice a week with these opportunities. And then you at the same time said, hey, we're signing this deal. They need to have multi-master databases. What would it take for Tashi to build out its multi-master database, which is on the roadmap outside of the gaming space, because we've got a customer that needs it? To me, that's the most valuable part. Like, trust me, I was at Hedera. They had a ton of money at one point. They could have solved every problem on earth if they would have just focused on a thing. But it's just not doable. There's just not enough brain power. There's not enough connectivity between problems and the technology. In this case, I've got a perspective. You've got a perspective. Your engineering team has a perspective. My engineers have a perspective. We're kind of in different worlds. But when we attack a problem, we can attack it from multiple perspectives. And at some point we can go, yeah, you don't really need Tashi for that. Conduit, this looks like it's more of your play. Or, oh yeah, no, Tashi could solve that specific problem. And it might not be as big as they were hoping to solve, but at least there's a piece of the puzzle that can be solved. And after a while, we get enough of these parties participating, we start solving those problems. So to me, like, there was an economic part that was exciting of, like, how do my token economics, how do my token holders benefit from me partnering with Conduit? But then there was an additional one, which is like, hey, we're both bringing problems to the table, like real problems. Like this vertical farming one, it's like a concrete problem that you can go and see their devices. You can go see their towers on site. You can go interview one of the farmers that's using their technology, who's like praising it up and down and having a real economic impact and a benefit on his cows. It's like, we can see real problems that are getting solved with our technology. And those are the problems we're looking for, right? The ones that have an immediate, real, tangible impact. And we don't get to see those if we're not talking to each other in this really collaborative way, right? There's no way that if you and I didn't sign an NDA, there's no way you would have told me about some of the projects you're working on, right? As much as we like each other and trust each other, like, business smart speaking, had we not signed an NDA and said, let's explore the business opportunities on both sides, you wouldn't have talked to me about some of these projects. I might have referred some projects to you, but there are some projects I probably wouldn't have mentioned. But now that our incentives are aligned to be like, hey, wait a second, every time you sell a conduit unit, there's a Tashi software running on it. And all somebody has to do is activate the license, and boom, now you're getting earnings on Tashi. You're getting all the benefits of Tashi. To me, there's an alignment of incentives that makes it really exciting to say, okay, what other projects do you have on your docket right now that we can talk about and solve together?
Yeah.
Right.
So that's
a different outcome.
100%. And there's two things that are interesting here. The same way in which we talk about cost centers to profit centers, which is a flip of a paradigm, right? I would say the same thing in terms of economic competition to alignment.
Yeah.
What we're trying to get people to realize is that your competitors are no longer your competitors. They are participants in the same value chain and supply chain and economy as you, raising the entire lake that you are also in, right? So you are now incentivized to turn around and, like, you and I could be in direct competition with the exact same stuff. Let's say that we are slightly different opinions. All of a sudden, if we remain in the fragmented way we are today, we remain peer competitors, which means I'm doing everything that I can to make sure you lose so I win. I'm sorry, but it comes down to that. Like, we're talking about capturing market share. That's what happens.
Well, and let's be real. When we first had our conversation, I'm talking about synchronized databases and my DAG structure and my consensus algorithm. And you're like, what do I need that for? I've got this model that solves the same problem, but I'm using synchronized atomic clocks. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, well, actually, that makes sense. If you have synchronized atomic clocks, what do you need a consensus algorithm for? But at the same time, we also have to realize, like, this was part of our discussion, right? We came to the realization that, like, there are scenarios where you don't have synchronized atomic clocks to trust and to rely on. And so it's like, okay, I get it. If we're on a conduit device with synchronized atomic clocks, boom, conduit solves a big chunk of the problem, even on the consensus level, right? There are even some consensus problems that conduit solves just in its base. But we had to have that intellectually honest discussion. We had to, like, confront the fact that, like, well, actually, we're kind of competitors here. And if I tell people they don't need synchronized clocks and just go install Tashi on their own computers, they'll be fine. And Conduit can go and say, well, screw that. Instead of trusting your devices to do consensus, just trust this equipment here that's going to have a synchronized clock. And it's something that, like, we still recognize, right? We still recognize that there are probably going to be scenarios where people can put a conduit device on and they don't need Tashi for that specific function in their stack. And there are going to be cases where they don't have synchronized clocks and where Tashi now becomes very valuable
100%
in that use case. And so I think that's always the hard thing, because when you're talking to people, you want to be friendly and you want to figure out where all the collaboration is going to happen. But when incentives conflict, deals aren't going to get done.
Nope. You want to talk about friction?
Yeah.
That is, insert the ultimate amount of economic friction right there.
Yeah.
So how do you break that? Because if we looked at that and look at a system in which friction is actually caused immensely by competition, it just is.
Yep.
What if you could start to break that down? How much more efficiency, speed of capital, turns, all the things we've been talking about starts to occur, because no longer are we focused on how do I beat Ken down or disseminate what he has and destroy it and say, oh, it's wrong. I can get to the other conversation, which is value driven, which is going, all right, Ken, you're here, I'm here. Let's talk about all the scenarios in which this works. And in there, massive value is created. How about we focus on value creation, right? Versus like moats and protecting, because that's the only way that I can actually survive.
Yep.
It's a flip of paradigms, but you have to have a system that is, remember, we go way back to the Bitcoin thing where you have to have a system in which the game is set, the rules don't get changed, and everyone knows walking in that this is a mutualized value creation, period.
Well, and I think in our case, we're very open with each other. The two companies are very open with each other, right? We're talking about our opportunities. And the value here is, like, at some point, we're going to engage an opportunity together where your functions are superior to my functions for 90% of the problem, right?
Sure.
The cool thing is if I can benefit from the 10% value on a project that previously we would have been competing on and I might have gotten 0% on, now I'm benefiting from us collaborating, right? And I think that's the important distinction here is, now let's step outside of it. Suppose we are strictly competitors and not collaborators or partners.
Okay.
Your argument is that as GDP grows, the value of conduit and tokens and rewards becomes higher. So indirectly, even though we're competing and going after the same market from two different angles, we might even have competitive products, meaning similar in the outcome, and we're not collaborating, but we're competing in the same ecosystem. The value generation, the value we bring into the ecosystem now benefits both of us in a way where we wouldn't have had that opportunity anyway.
You would have no way else to capture the value. It would have been a lost value.
Exactly.
Lost. That is the biggest difference. So if you can get everyone to understand that, the mind shifts completely from protection to collaboration. All of a sudden, I would move into, like, man, in fact, our core team has said this, Ken, and it's very, very important. We have no interest in building a bunch of the things we're building.
Right.
We would love for other people to be building it and bringing it in. We just are trying to create the value capture using technology, right?
Right.
It doesn't have to be ours.
Yeah.
In fact, I can't wait to, like, that's why I got so excited about you and what you guys have, because this was exactly what I'm saying. Our team's looking at going like, oh, thank God we don't have to build that.
Yes, exactly.
Like, we don't want to, we just want to bring it in, right? And then here's the other thing that's really interesting that I will give you. There is a fundamental reason why Microsoft stopped innovating and did nothing but acquiring. It's because when the ship as a single source gets too big, it cannot change directions. It can't be innovative. And so what happens? Startups get acquired. Okay. The real innovation happens in a nimble type of innovation setting. Okay. Here's what I want to say. If we build this correctly, we keep all of that spirit and all of that economic incentive nimble and dispersed, not in creating a corporation, which means if you really looked at it that way, what should come into the conduit network is like as a reward, like again, this incentivization thing, right? Is a whole bunch of incredible technologists, powerfully nimble teams that are able to operate as if they were one corporation, maybe the largest in the world, dare I say, yet completely autonomous and moving very quick and collaborating. Okay, no one's going to keep up. The big guys cannot keep up with that.
That's exactly right. And Brandon, we are just barely warming up. And I hate to say it, but I have a hard stop right now. I have a call with an investor that I got to go take.
You got to go to it. See, it's always about the hour in. It's about the hour in. You called it.
I know, but all good. I want to keep this conversation going, and I want to make sure we're not chewing bubble gum here and just saying the same things every week over and over again. I want to make sure that we're expanding this dialogue. I think we have a few more things to expand, but next week I'd like to bring in more people. So we might do a stream with more people, or we might just switch back to a space. Everybody stay tuned. Again, every week, Tuesday, noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, we get together. We have these kind of conversations. We're going to keep this going next week. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.